Good evening. I'm Bob Goldberg, Vice President and DeArmond Executive Director of the Knight Campus at the University of Oregon, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the 9th Annual Science Night Out. At the Knight Campus, our focused mission is simply stated to accelerate the impact of scientific innovations. That mission reflects a deep belief that science doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists for society. And in turn, science flourishes when it's supported by and integrated into society. That's why we created Science Night Out, to connect our broader community with the excitement, the creativity, and the impact of scientific discovery. That spirit of engagement and acceleration is actually embedded directly in our full name, the Phil and Penny Knight Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact, where we're committed to translating research into practical benefits that help people as quickly as possible. Now, I'm proud to share just a little bit of our momentum, as I do every year, in the Knight Campus right now. Last month, we erected a new sky bridge connecting our current space in the first building to a second 184,000 square foot building, which when complete will double our research footprint. This facility opening early next year will house up to 20 new research groups, expanded academic programs, and the second Pape Family Innovation Center for our startup companies. It marks an exciting new chapter in the Knight Campus, which is increasingly, I hope you will agree with me, looking like a campus. But as I've always said, it's more than bricks and mortar that really defines us. In the Knight Campus, it's its people. The scientists, the educators, the staff, and the students redefining the limits of what's possible every day. If you look closely here, you may be able to see our speaker tonight standing next to me and the duck at the bottom of the stairs. And speaking of people, I'd like to recognize Helen O'Coin and Paige Crawford, who took the lead on organizing tonight's event with a whole crew of other people, not shown here. Helen and Paige are really representative of the amazingly professional and passionate staff who often work behind the scenes, but who I'm so grateful to work with every day in the Knight Campus. Will you all please join me in giving a round of applause? This year, we also did something really exciting. We celebrated the very first PhD graduates in bioengineering at the University of Oregon, Kylie Williams and Jonathan Dorgan, with several others expected to defend their theses and graduate in the coming months. And congratulations to Professor Marian Hederachi for graduating her very first PhD student. We've also recruited two outstanding new faculty, Sarah Keller and David Peeler, who will be joining us from Oxford University. They'll be among the first faculty setting up labs in the new building and will add exciting new dimensions of research to our existing community. And our Knight Campus Graduate Internship Program, or KCGIP, just confirmed a record number of incoming students, thanks to our team's diligent recruiting efforts, and also in part to $5 million in funds from the National Science Foundation and an Oregon Workforce Ready grant. And that brings me to our speaker tonight, Dr. Jim Hutchison, Hutch, a person whose fingerprints are on nearly every milestone I've just mentioned. Jim has been a key architect of the Knight Campus since the very beginning, helping to shape the vision, the academic foundation, and the culture we continue to build on today. He led the development of the first academic tracks and was instrumental in uniting them under the Knight Campus umbrella as KCGIP. His leadership helped transition the master's program from a long-standing university asset without a home into a nationally recognized model for industry workforce training in science and engineering. Jim was also among the faculty who envisioned and helped launch our shared core facilities, forging key industry partnerships to support them. He's a cross-disciplinary collaborator by nature, a community builder at heart, and someone who turns grassroots ideas into lasting programs. Whether it was run with the research or student recruitment effort, or our inside lunch gatherings that connected colleagues across labs and teams, Jim has quietly and consistently built the foundation for what the Knight Campus is today and what it will be in the future. Jim also played a pivotal role in creating U of O's first engineering program in its history, the Bioengineering PhD. And once that was done, he founded the Fermentation Innovation Lab and an associated minor in Brewing Innovation. I can't help but smile when I say that. This bridges two of his passions to inspire students to think boldly and creatively while learning the ins and outs of innovation. Beyond his leadership, Jim's scientific contributions are truly remarkable. His research focuses on designing nanoparticles for electronics, sensing, medicine, and energy. He's a pioneer in green chemistry and nanoscience and helped write the nation's first green organic chemistry curriculum and textbook. He founded the Safer Nanomaterials and Nanomanufacturing Initiative and has also served on several National Academy of Sciences panels shaping the future of nanotech and green science. Jim's the author of over 160 scientific papers, holds multiple patents, has started numerous companies, and has had numerous national honors. But more than that, he's a leader who brings people together to make science matter for society and with society. Now tonight, following the presentation, I'll join Jim back up here on the stage to answer questions from the audience. All right, now without further delay, please join me in welcoming our 2025 Science Night Out speaker, Professor Jim Hutchison.
Thanks, Bob, for that extended introduction. Thank you all for being here. You all do know that this talks about chemistry, right? Are you in the right room? Let's see. So I fell in love with chemistry, I guess, 42 years ago. And if you ask the people that I work with, or any of my friends, I take every opportunity to describe my relationship, my love for chemistry. They don't always appreciate that. I do appreciate, though, that although I love chemistry, and I want to share this for the next 45 minutes, you all might have a different relationship with chemistry. At least that's what people tell me frequently whenever they ask, what do you do? And I say, I'm a chemist. They go, oh. But I'd like you to suspend your judgment for the next 45 minutes while I make a case for chemistry. And the reason that I think chemistry is so fascinating is because it is everywhere. If you look around this room, everything that you see is chemistry. The walls, the paint, the seats you're sitting on, each other, and the things you can't see. The air is chemistry. Our water is chemistry. The molecules that are dissolved in those things are chemistry. The other thing that I think is extremely fascinating is that chemistry connects to pretty much everything. It connects to physics, biology. It connects to business, art. It connects to everything that we do. So it's often been termed the central science. What I'd like to convince you of tonight is that not only is it central, but it's the creative science. The thing about chemistry is that we can envision, design, and build all kinds of incredible three-dimensional structures at the molecular scale that have properties or functions that are really valuable to us. I'll just give you a quick example. These are two molecules that I just want to illustrate the interesting properties of molecules with. If you look at these two structures, most of the structures are the same for these two molecules. These happen to be two molecules that are natural products. They exist in nature. They're called terpenes. And they're also part of the aroma of a nice, tasty IPA. 90% of the atoms in these molecules are exactly in the same place and are the same. And just here at the bottom, this chemical or this molecule has a double bond, whereas this one has an alcohol present. And those make a big difference. So the molecule on the left is limonene, and it has the aroma of citrus peels. On the other hand, the molecule on the right, even though very similar in structure, is alpha terpineol, which smells like lilacs. Okay, these molecules are flat on the screen. If you're not a chemist, they just look flat. So we have some molecules that we're going to pass around, some molecular models of these that we're going to pass around. They look like this. You can't really see those, especially if you're up in the upper seats. But we'll be passing these around the bottom sections here that compare them. They also have a sachet on them that has the aroma, so you can see what that's like. When it gets to the end of your row, just pass it to the person behind, and we'll have them zigzag up each of these sections. I got involved with chemistry, I think, really early on because I was fascinated with structure. Here I am at 5 years old, building, I think it's a bench. And I lived in rural Oregon, just outside of Florence, and we lived on an old farm with a creek that ran through the farm. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, and some of you might have experienced this too, but people wanted to be self-reliant, and many people read Mother Earth News as a magazine. And there was an article in Mother... Did anybody? Yeah? Okay, yeah. So I read that, and it was like, wow, you could harness the hydroelectric power from a creek. That would be so cool. So at, I think, about age 10, I designed a water wheel. And you can see my schematic here. If you talk to my colleagues, my drawing skills have not improved since then. But it did allow me to produce a water wheel, which I did put in that creek. And the thing about this is its structure and its function, right? These are two things that go together. That's also what happens in chemistry. In the 4th grade, I was very fortunate to have a super influential teacher, Mr. Hill. He was my homeroom teacher as well as my science teacher. That was just an amazing opportunity. And he had us do all kinds of great experiments, experiential learning, way ahead of his time. And we were required to enter the science fair competition every year as part of our class. This is me with a model of the Oregon dunes that were close to where I grew up, that was built of paper mache, sand, and a few twigs from the yard. But it showed the different structures of the dunes and the different ecosystems within that. Again, a model, a structure. Throughout my younger years, I had two passions. I had a passion for the outdoors, and I had a passion for science. And as I eventually moved to Salem and graduated from high school there, I was contemplating where I would go to college and what I would study. And I thought, I love the outdoors, I'll be a forestry major. So I went to the University of Washington. And to keep things short, I'll just say that their view of forestry and mine were not very consistent. So that was out. I came back to Oregon, to the University of Oregon, where I thought I would study biology. And after a quarter of thinking about Mendel's wrinkled and round peas, I was so bored. It wasn't for me. Briefly, I thought I would study outdoor pursuits leadership, which is offered at the University of Oregon, to get into that other part of my passion. And I thought at some point, maybe science would be a better living than being an outdoor guide. So I ditched that and eventually fell in love with chemistry. There were 3 really important characters that prompted that, or maybe they were the matchmakers of that love affair with chemistry. The first one was Don Swinehart. Don taught the honors general chemistry, and in the fall of 1982, I had his class, and Don loved to give for his first midterm what he called a zinger exam. And a zinger exam is intended to weed out the weak students to decrease workload for the professor, apparently. It was almost effective. I flunked the first midterm, the zinger, And 13 of us showed up in his office the next day where he told us what we needed to do to better ourselves or we needed to move along. That was a wake-up call. I don't believe I got anything less than an A in chemistry after that. The next year was even more transformative for me. I had these two characters, and by the way, I do mean characters. These guys were something else. Lloyd was a cantankerous guy, a real brilliant organic chemist, and an entrepreneur here in town. Lloyd would come into the laboratory where I was working with the most horrible smelling organic amine compound that you can imagine. The kind of thing where if you took a brief sniff of it, it would turn your stomach. And Lloyd wanders by, he had quite the nose for chemistry, took a big whiff and said, I know what that is. The next term, another character, Tom Koenig, who was a starting quarterback at SMU when in college. Here in this picture, he's actually being inducted into the SMU Hall of Fame. He was both very tough, but also quite inspirational. And what he did is he said, this term in lab, as our second term in organic chemistry lab, this term you're going to make a compound that nobody else has ever made before. And if you do, you will have the world's supply of it. And to me, that was like, what? I can do that? That is awesome. Well, we tried to make that world supply, but it didn't quite work out. But there were other times later to do that. I joined a research lab because I was so hooked now, and these are the first reactions. These are the first synthetic steps of building molecules, building structures that I had. And I can still remember what some of these compounds smelled like. You know, they had nice, lovely smells, but it just, really was a strong connection to those chemicals. And then further, this chemical, which you can see has these four ends, those are nitrogen atoms. Four ends like that, nitrogens, makes what we call a ligand that's prone to bind metals. And so I remember the first time when I stirred this ligand with a metal, and it went from being a white compound to this beautiful dark green crystalline material in this compound. And then further, when I changed the oxidation state of that chemical, it made these red-purple microcrystals that were just so incredibly beautiful. So I was really getting hooked on these making structures and the cool properties that they had. This is actually a crystal structure of the molecule that I was targeting. This molecule is a model for a much more complicated molecule, vitamin B12, that's a very important biochemical for many, many processes that occur in our bodies. And what's really interesting about vitamin B12 is it has a metal-carbon bond. That's quite rare in biology, but it turns out very important to the operation of this molecule. You can see here I've labeled, here's the cobalt that's inside this ligand structure, and it's attached to this carbon. That's the key feature. We could have tried to synthesize vitamin B12, but it's actually quite difficult. It was done in the mid-50s. It was 72 steps. And it literally took an army of postdoctoral fellows and PhD students to make it. On the other hand, this more simplified model that we could study, I could make in 6 steps. So this was a really incredible opportunity to build something like this, to study its properties, and that inspired me to go to graduate school. But before that, I want to think about that structure that I showed you. That structure, that molecular structure, is quite a lot smaller than the structures that I was making as a child. How small is that? Well, it's about a nanometer in dimension. Okay, that doesn't help much, probably. So 50,000 of them would span across the cross-section of a human hair. So it's incredibly small, and that might even be hard to fathom. So here's another analogy. It would be like if we took all the people in Autzen Stadium and they had to get in a single file line to get into the stadium. It'd be one of those. So I don't know if that helps either, but these are incredibly small molecules or small structures. As I said, I finished my work at the U of O. I went to Stanford for graduate school, and I learned about a project there that aimed to convert nitrogen to ammonia. And that seemed really intriguing. One of the reasons is because this is a major challenge for worldwide industry. Currently, we use about 130 million metric tons of ammonia every year to fertilize crops. Again, now a big number instead of a small thing. That's 1 million train car loads of ammonia. If you line those up on the equator, it would go around the Earth 4.5 times. So it's an incredible amount of material, and as a consequence, although the air around us is 80% nitrogen and we could convert that, it takes a ton of energy to do that because nitrogen in our air is very stable, it's very inert, it doesn't want to react. So the production of ammonia takes up about 2% of all the energy used in the world, and consequently contributes about the same percentage of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a big challenge. And what we knew is that nature knows how to do this. There's an enzyme called nitrogenase that converts nitrogen to ammonia at room temperature in the ground. One of the things that we thought at the time that was really important is that it could perhaps use two metals to do that, so that the two metals could act simultaneously on the nitrogen, activate it, and perhaps convert it to ammonia. So we wondered whether we could make some kind of molecular structure that would mimic nature, like the model that I talked about for B12. And this is the model that we pursued. Again, you can see the nitrogen is here, a ligand, but now there are two ligands that hold two metals, and they're held together by a rigid spacer that holds them at just the right distance so that they could act on nitrogen. Well, I was like, okay, look, this is really cool structure. It's a big challenge. I was hooked. And it didn't seem super difficult, but I was quite naive. Here we could use a linker that was a rigid spacer-like molecule, and all we needed to do is really build these ligand rings onto the outside of that. Seemed fairly straightforward, but it's not. There's no test, don't worry. There's many steps, all right? So to make this, it takes about 25 steps. It's very low yielding because some of these are very challenging reactions, so less than 1% overall yield. And as a consequence of that, we would literally start with 3 to 5 gallon buckets, and at the very end up with a couple of thimblefuls of these purple crystals. All right, so a lot of work, but more than that, these reactions are quite difficult to carry out. Some of these require temperatures so hot, such high temperatures that the glass starts to glow orange. They involve heavy metals like chromium. They involve toxic reagents and solvents, and a lot of solvents. So I was able to do this, but there were a lot of consequences associated with it. And one of those consequences is I wasn't always in the good graces of the people who shared laboratory space with me. And one time when I left for a short vacation, my desk was removed and a doghouse was put in its place. I mean, despite the fact that I was chained there, at least they did give me water and food, so that was good. I eventually did graduate with my PhD from Stanford. I'm shown here with my PhD advisor, Jim Coleman, celebrating. And when I left the U of O, I always wanted to come back here. But the odds are pretty low. So I had to better myself some more. So I took a detour to North Carolina for a couple of years to do a postdoctoral fellowship. And then, very fortunately, in 1994, I was able to come back to the University of Oregon and start as an assistant professor. One of the things that I contemplated as I was thinking about the independent research career that I wanted to have is this nagging conflict that I had. On the one hand, these beautiful, complex structures and the cool chemistry that they could help carry out is really, really enticing. But on the other hand, the outdoors person and the environmentalist in me did not like the fact that we created so much waste and so many hazards involved in that. I'll get back to research in a minute, but the other thing that happened when I was an assistant professor is you have to teach. And I got a chance to teach organic chemistry. Thankfully, I didn't have to teach here in this laboratory, but this is where I learned organic chemistry at the U of O. And you can see here, this is the ventilation system. It's not very sophisticated. The job of that ventilation system is to move the fumes up and out of the building. But at that time, we didn't know it, but they actually just moved the fumes to another part of the building. Furthermore, as I kind of mentioned when I was talking about Professor Dolby, we worked with pretty nasty stuff and we generated a lot of waste. So that was kind of the baseline. When they found out that this ventilation system didn't work well, they really pivoted as a university and built this amazing space where you can see the fume hoods here, much more useful, modern instrumentation, lots of great stuff. The challenge that I faced as an instructor was the capacity of this space was 60 students, and the capacity of this was 18. And that meant that we were teaching on weekends and at night in order to accommodate the growing demand for space in those laboratories. And a lot of us had many other things to do and didn't want to teach at those times necessarily. Furthermore, to try to reduce the amount of waste, but not necessarily the hazard, they had pursued microscale chemistry. So you can see the size of the hand here. These are very small pieces of glassware. This is really more what chemists use. So it was kind of artificial, and that was interfering with some of the learning opportunities. In addition to that, I started looking around and seeing that in this textbook, for example, everybody was reducing the amount of starting materials that they were using for all these different reactions, dating back to 1900 up to the current time, which was in the mid-80s. I looked at this table and I said, wait a second, chemistry's changing, the world's changing, but we've been teaching the same chemistry for 100 years. Something had to be done about that. And then the other thing is, again, the world is changing. Our recognition of the hazards that we were being exposed to and the impact on the environment was becoming evident. But the organic chemistry curriculum at the university was not teaching students how to design things that were safer. All of the approaches were based upon very entrenched petrochemical feedstocks, and lots of the processes used lots of energy, water, and raw materials. So we weren't really preparing people either. One day, early in my career, I walked into the library, and that's kind of an unusual thing now. People don't really go to libraries anymore. They do all these things electronically. But when I walked in, they had a new books case, right? So they showcased all the books that when you walked into the library, and I saw this book on the shelf called Green Chemistry, Designing Chemistry for the Environment. For me, this just was a light bulb going off. The goal of green chemistry was, let's do all the things we need out of chemistry, but let's take into account that we need to do it in a safer way, in a way that's better for the environment. And from there, so many questions came up. What if we could teach all the things we needed to teach, but teach it with chemistry that was much safer? What if we could modernized the curriculum so it taught students how to solve some of these important problems that we were facing in the world. And what if it could just make the lab safer and cheaper? Well, flash forward 5 years, a lot of work by colleagues and graduate students, undergraduates, collaborators. We did it. We developed a whole new curriculum for the organic laboratory that's built upon that premise, that we could teach what students need to know, but do it in a safer manner. I'll just give you one example. One of the things that chemists do is extract material from natural sources. Typically, when we do that extraction, we use organic solvents to do that. The organic solvents that we use have hazards associated with them, typically, and sometimes those organic solvents even stay in the material that we've extracted, which is not fantastic. For those of you who have some chemistry background, you might notice the character here. This is one of the molecules that was passed around. That's limonene. Limonene is extracted from orange peels. And one of the things that had been changing in the world was people were using supercritical or liquid CO2 to do these extractions. And then if you just let it evaporate, like the worst case scenario is there's a little bit of CO2 in the air, like that we breathe out, left over. So no organic solvents needed. But the problem here, and where the brilliance of the people who developed this this new laboratory for our students is that normally you have to use big stainless steel vessels that can accommodate high pressure in order to do this. But Lally McKenzie, who's a student in my lab, spent Friday afternoons trying a whole bunch of stuff out to see what would work. And here's what she came up with. A centrifuge tube, plastic, could be used instead of a stainless steel reactor. And what we did is take ground up orange peel, we put dry ice in here, put this in a tube with warm water, and as you'll see in this movie, the dry ice will start to melt, pressurize, and turn into liquid. Even chemists have usually never seen liquid CO2 before, because it's usually inside something stainless or in a tank. And as this boils, some of it leaks out the top, so it takes maybe 5 minutes. We'll speed this up so you don't have to watch for 5 minutes. But as it percolates down through here, it extracts the limonene out of the orange peel and then deposits it in the tip. There it is. So we can now pull the orange out and harvest that drop of limonene and show the students how this kind of extraction could happen. This is one of the most popular experiments that we ever developed, and it's probably been done in thousands of institutions around the world. With all that together, we were really fortunate to have a lot of support from the National Science Foundation and others to document and disseminate this information to the rest of the world. We wrote a textbook. My co-author Ken Doxey and I wrote a textbook. We partnered with a variety of organizations to build a laboratory that had only a few fume hoods, but lots of bench space to use this kind of green chemistry, and realized all of these different types of benefits. The fact that it was more modern and safer, cheaper. We didn't have to spend as much money on energy because we weren't exhausting all the warm air out of our buildings through the fume hoods. So there are many benefits. And we taught the world about how to do it. This is just the United States, but over the course of 15 years, we brought in 300 faculty members from around the country. They spent a week with us learning how we did it with an aim of going to their institution and establishing green chemistry there. Okay, rough transition here. Meanwhile, back in the research lab, we were doing a lot of interesting things there too. And I just want to give you a flavor of the kind of research that we were doing to set up a cool project that we did with that. So we did a lot of work with nanoparticles. Nanoparticles are on the same, a little bit bigger than those molecules that I talked about. They're a little bit bigger than a nanometer, usually. their properties are incredibly tied to their structure. So if they're bigger, they have different properties than when they're smaller. So we developed all kinds of ways to produce very precisely controlled structures, sizes, and compositions. This one, you can actually map out where each individual atom is. That's called undecagold. And then in metal oxides, we developed ways to control all of the parameters of these. And you can see this transmission electron micrograph that shows how uniform these particles are, even though they're much larger. Inorganic particles are awesome. Take my word for it. But they're not as useful if they don't have any chemical structure on the outside. So one of the things we did is figured out how to install different chemistries on the outside to manipulate the properties of those core materials. So you could take the same particle and, for example, put molecules on the outside that made it soluble in oil or organic solvents. On the other hand, you could make other particles that were soluble in water, so we could control what they dissolved in. But even better than that, we could add molecules on the outside that allowed us to target those particles to particular places, let's say to biomolecules or tissues. And then finally, we talked about green chemistry. Nanoscience was just growing up as I was starting. It was just becoming a new technology. And what a chance that we had, a chance in a lifetime, to try to design it green from the beginning instead of letting it develop as a technology and then having to clean it up later. So we established green nanoscience, and that meant how do you make them safer and more efficient, so it's a manufacturing challenge. But in addition to that, how do we just design them so that they will be safe? I'll show you just one example here. We worked with Oregon State University using zebrafish as a model, and then made libraries of particles where we could control the size and the coatings, as I was describing in the last slide. And so, for example, all of these particle sizes, from very small to larger, were quite safe. That's what the green indicates. Quite safe if you coated them with these kinds of ligands or molecules on the outside. On the other hand, molecules like this with a positive charge were always toxic to the zebrafish, although the small ones were less toxic than the big ones. And then if you put a negative charge on the outside, those were not toxic, but they caused other malformations in the development of zebrafish, so we knew something was wrong there. These are the kinds of things that could then be inputs into designing nanomaterials that were safer. So the question that I had was, could we take all the things that we were doing, all of these three different areas, and bring them together into a project that would be beneficial to society? As you hopefully have gathered by now, I love the outdoors. This is a picture of me backcountry skiing at Tam MacArthur Rim that's just outside of Sisters, very close to Mount Bachelor. It is a harsh place. The wind blows, it rains, it snows, it's cold, it gets hot too, it's all these things. But we can stay comfortable out there because of the incredible innovations in athletic apparel. Right? We have great waterproof but breathable coat, jackets. We have all kinds of insulation that stays warm even when it's wet, and so on. A far cry from the blue jeans and hoodies that I hiked in when I was 6 years old. But the challenge with these incredible advances in outdoor apparel is they're made from synthetic materials. And those synthetic materials, as I'm sure plenty of you know, can develop persistent odor. And that is an annoying part of those. What I want to show you is that we can take all of the three aspects of my research, apply that to this problem, and come up with a solution to that persistent odor problem. So first of all, why does persistent odor, or PO, happen? When we sweat, which I'm doing plenty of up here in the lights, when we sweat, we excrete fatty acids, and it turns out that bacteria love to eat fatty acids, and when they do that, the metabolic byproducts of that create the odor. So if you're smelling in your synthetic gear, it's not you, it's them. But the other challenge with synthetics is that because they're hydrophobic, that means that they like oils and they don't like water, they absorb and hold those fatty acids and also the odor molecules. And when you try to wash them, the hydrophobic material repels the detergent, and it means that you can't really get rid of all that stuff, so it builds up in there. So there's bacteria in there, fatty acids, and the odor molecules. So you put on that clothing and wear it for 5 minutes. You just washed it, and it already is starting to smell. Well, this could just be considered annoying, but it turns out that consumer behavior makes it a problem. Because there's really three things that we know consumers do when the clothing gets stinky. They wash it more frequently, they use harsher cleaners, or they replace it. And if they wash it more frequently, then that means more water, detergent, and energy use. Also, it wears out the garment more quickly. If you look at the lint in your dryer, you know this is true. If you use harsher detergents, then that's going to have more environmental impacts, but it also means you're going to wear out the garment more quickly. And again, you have to produce new garments, and there's impacts associated with that. And the same thing is true, of course, if you replace the garment. And social scientists have studied this, and odor does cause people to do all these things. So one of the ideas was, could you use silver to kill the bacteria and stop odor? And since antiquity, we have been using silver to control bacterial growth in things like milk and wine, in liquids. And that happens by slow release of silver ions from the container into the liquid. So the thought was, maybe we could use nanosilver on the surface of clothing to manage the bacteria and do the same thing. Well, it didn't work well. So in the early generations of these technologies, we have a graph here that shows how quickly silver's lost. So this is the amount of silver remaining. So this is the loading of silver at the beginning. And this is the number of washes. And what you can see is within 5 washes, all gone. All right, so this is not good. Because first of all, it's not effective after the silver washes off, and second of all, you've just put silver into the environment for no reason. So that led to the research questions. Could we figure out how to use linkers to bond the silver very tightly to the fabric so that it didn't come off? And further, could we then use this type of technology to really control how much silver? So instead of loading it up with silver and hoping it didn't wash off, could we just dose it with the right amount? And then these are bonus questions for the social scientists. If this worked, would it cause consumers to reduce the frequency of the clothes washing and maybe increase product lifespan? So we started a startup company that spun out of my research laboratory to partner in this, and developed a technology called Linked On that utilized these different aspects of my research. So the first thing we had to do was figure out how to make silver nanoparticles that were well-defined, that were made in a green way, at significant scale, cost-effective, and all of that. And we were able to do that. And that was relatively straightforward. The harder part was figuring out, how do you grab a hold of those silver particles and anchor them to the clothing? So we built these bifunctional linkers that had an affinity for silver on this end. So you can see here the silver binding to that. And at the other end had a high affinity to bind to the fabrics like polyester. And as a consequence of these linkers, we were able to get very strong binding. You could dose the amount of silver on there. You didn't have to coat everything. And as a consequence, we could get much lower doses. And here's the proof in the pudding compared to those older technologies, or the first technologies. And I would note that these were just washed with water. These weren't even washed with detergent. We could wash up to 30 times with the linked-on technology and retain half the silver and reduce the microbial populations by over 99%. And I would say that the reason we chose 30 here is because that's the lower limit of how often people wash a shirt before they get rid of it. Over time, we wanted to extend that to what the upper end is, so we found that you could actually go out to 50 launderings and still have 99% bacterial reduction. We could get very low loading, so 20 ppm. This means you could coat 500,000 shirts with about a pound of silver. So that's an incredibly low dose. And then we tested the laundry effluent to make sure that we were not inducing aquatic toxicity. So we could use less silver and address consumer needs. And then again, these are social science questions, but I guess I would say that I wore one of these shirts on a week-long backpacking trip in the Wind River Range, and we left one shirt in the car and the other shirt, and we then did this with them to mix them up, and then did a sniff test side by side, and it was pretty difficult to tell the difference between those two. So that's a good documentation. Very scientific. I don't think I had to take vacation for that. Okay, so we were so excited, and we had visions of working with, large athletic apparel companies to coat their garments, to coat their raw materials, to impart antimicrobial properties. This is one of the first really dramatic lessons about entrepreneurial activities that I learned, and that is none of these pieces of clothing in the store smell, and therefore nobody wants to pay more because they don't smell, right? Even though it may not smell later, you're making a decision to buy something at that point. So there wasn't a lot of business there. So we pivoted, as entrepreneurs do, and said, well, wait a sec, what happens when somebody has a multi-$100 garment and it really smells? Every time they put it on, they try to wash it, it just smells. Now they're going to be motivated. So we developed an approach that they could apply this material at home. There's a big difference, though, because when you're doing this with a dirty garment, you got to get it clean first, because otherwise the silver the silver linkers don't bond well. We were very excited about this product as well, but then this product has to be registered by the EPA, and the EPA was being sued over registration of other silver products, and they were not going to allow us to go to market with this. But remember this detergent that we made. We had to make a detergent to clean up the surface of the garments. It turned out that detergent was remarkable in its ability to get all of the fatty acids and odor molecules and bacteria out of the garments. And that became the next product. So you can see here scanning electron microscope images. So we had a variety of names. It's currently Defunkify for obvious reasons. But you can see on the left, these are the fibers of the fabric, and see how clean those are. And then look here, all of the debris that is still in the fibers for some of the competing detergents. And so this detergent that we developed for a completely different reason turned out to be one that removed so much of the food for bacteria that those bacteria could not produce the malodors. One point I want to make here is that I am sure that everyone in this room has either heard or thinks that greener products are more expensive and don't perform as well. This is a very common notion. I think this is because we need to do better at designing the material to do all the things we want it to do. So in this case, what we did when we designed this product is, yes, we wanted it to be safer. So we did use safe ingredients. We also discovered that sometimes safe ingredients put together are not safe together. It's called synergistic toxicity. And so we actually tested all of the mixtures too to make sure those were safe. So that's the safety part. It's got to perform as well or better as the competitors, because people aren't going to pay a premium. They aren't going to even pay the same for something that doesn't perform better. So it does remove the fatty acids and the odor molecules and doesn't leave residue for the bacteria to eat. And then, of course, it has to be cost competitive. This was our design criteria to make Defunkify. And you can find these products online and in local retailers for laundry and dish detergent and odor reduction with spray. All right, last chapter. I told you at the beginning that I really am an advocate for chemistry, and I want to tell the world about how awesome it is. So I was pretty frustrated in the early 2000s that we simply weren't doing a good job of communicating the value of chemistry. And the idea was, people are interested in other things. What if you could get them excited about chemistry through the things that they already like? Maybe they'd want to learn the secret chemistry of that thing that they really enjoy. And maybe that would enhance their interest in the topic they already care about. So my spouse, Julie Hack, and I did an experiment where at the University of Oregon, there are freshman interest groups. That's 20 students that are part of a large class, like in this case, general chemistry. We were able to pull 20 of them out that really cared about skiing and snowboarding. Right? So that was easy. But normally, when you think about skiing and snowboarding, what branch of science do you typically think about? Physics. I heard it somewhere down here. Yeah, every time we talked about this, like, don't you mean chemistry of physics? Or sorry, chemistry of physics. The physics of skiing? It's like, no, it's the chemistry. One of the things we would do is, at the time we were teaching this, Ötzi, the Iceman, was found, the remains of Ötzi was found in the Alps in a crevasse. And what was really interesting about the Iceman was the clothing was almost intact, so you could see what that person wore. And what's interesting is it's all stuff that could be gathered in nature. It was furs and reeds and things like that. Well, today, we make what we need, right? And so this was a big thing for the students to see that a ski jacket like this might have 20 or 30 distinct chemical materials within it. The zipper, the Velcro, the hydrophobic surface, the waterproof breathable membranes. And so that got them really excited. But not just that, but there are incredible chemical materials that make up the light, flexible, strong skis and snowboards that we use today. And snow crystals are that's chemistry. And the way they form and the way they transform, those are all things that then lead to exciting things like avalanches. And ski waxes and so on and so on. So the thing that we found here is that freshmen could learn concepts that normally would be delayed until their senior year because they were excited about the topic and they were motivated to learn. So then I thought, well, what do people like more than skis and snowboards? Beer. So could we teach people about the really incredible chemistry through the lens of beer and brewing? And so I did a number of pub talks. This is at Worthy Brewing over in Bend. Happy people tasting beer, learning chemistry. And these were guided flights, so the audience would taste and learn the chemistry along the way. There are over 1,000 chemicals in a beer. And if we just look at some of these, what we see is The aroma is a bunch of different terpenes of different varieties. Here's our star limonene again. The head of the beer has CO2 for sure. If it's a nitro, it might also have nitrogen. It also has proteins that help the head stay full. It, of course, has water. That's the major component. Ethanol, esters that come from yeast, bittering acids that come from hops, and then residual sugars that give it mouthfeel. And all of that comes from 4 ingredients. And a lot of processing. So if we look at this, there's all kinds of places to study chemistry here. So there's the mash, where we put the grain, the malted barley, in hot water, and the enzymes that exist on the barley convert the starches to sugar. It's amazing. Little chemical machines. During the boil, we reduce the volume, we sterilize that, but we're also imparting hop bitterness and hop aroma, hop flavor, all chemical transformations. And then when it all gets cooled down and it goes into a fermenter, we add yeast, and the yeast convert all of that sugar to alcohol and other cool flavor molecules. So it's an incredible chemistry set that involves these cool ingredients and a lot of process. But the thing that I learned about that is that it's not just the chemistry. We have been literally brewing beer for 13,000 years, and we've learned a lot. We've grown with brewing. This is the invention of straws shown in a Sumerian carving. These are the straws, and they're slurping beer off of the sediment through a straw. We learned how to roast malt without burning it. It used to be made over an open flame, and it burnt it all, and there was no such thing as a light beer because of that. We brewed without thermometers or refrigeration or even knowing what yeast was. We didn't know what yeast was until, really know about it until the 1850s. So the question is, this was cool, but could we actually teach something else? Not just chemistry, but innovation. Could we teach students about being more innovative through beer and brewing? So we have. It's old. It's a great palette or framework for teaching innovation because we've been doing it a long time. The brewing industry is highly innovative. It's accessible to everybody. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a scientist. It's an important connection to Oregon industry, and it's highly conducive to experimentation because we can turn a batch of beer around every few weeks. It's not like wine where we kind of get one shot a year. And that all means it can be hands-on and experiential. I encourage you to visit our website. We built a brewery on the Knight campus. This is the brew house, and this is the students actually doing their very first batch of beer last fall. Here they are at the end of a brew day, putting their beer or their wort into these fermenters and letting that ferment. They're pretty excited. It's an interdisciplinary group, 9 students from all different disciplines. They learned all about beer, tasted about 45 different styles of beer to learn. They learned how to brew, and this term they're really focusing on innovation. Next fall, they'll wrap up with a capstone where they'll have an independent project that they can pursue. In the winter term, they made their first beers that was theirs alone, one inspired by a maple bar, another a sour berry beer, and a third that was inspired essentially by a Mounds bar, coconut chocolate stout. They like sweet things mostly, except for the sour. Right now, the students are working on ancient beers for inspiration. So chicha, cornul, and Kütebier, these are all from around the world, but not beers you can buy at the beer stein. And they brewed these on week 1, and from there they have been optimizing these beers. The chicha, it turns out, is going to be one that we're going to be brewing with the local brewer, Toby Schock from Wheel of Pizza, and that will be debuted in Eugene Beer Week. So it's a super exciting way to connect our students to real-world opportunities. To wrap up here, my own journey started as a really selfish interest in complex, challenging molecules to make, but over the years transitioned to how do we find solutions through those molecules. I hope you've seen that molecular design is a way that we can actually solve problems. And as we look forward, I think the future of chemistry is, targeted molecules that can help with tissue healing. So this is an example from Marian Hetiarchi's group on the Knight campus. Or drug delivery systems that only deliver that drug at the place we want it to deliver when we want it to deliver. This is an example from Danielle Benoit's lab. And then how do we make interfaces between things that are dissimilar, like a semiconductor and a brain? That's not easy, and this is the kind of thing that's happening in Felix Decu's lab. You can't do any of this without facilities, people, and funding. You already saw some of the facilities in the Knight campus, and the university has amazing research facilities. The people here, this was, I think, the last picture of my research group. But there's been so many students and other collaborators over the years, 19 postdoc fellows and visiting scholars, nearly 100 students ranging from undergrads to PhD, over 200 research collaborators, and dozens of co-instructors. And then we've been really fortunate to have great funding from a diversified set of sources, federal funding, foundations, the university, companies, and very generous individuals. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for attending tonight and for your attention, and we will be taking questions. Thanks.
Jim, that was awesome. I think the only class I ever dropped out of was organic chemistry. Somehow, you made chemistry really interesting tonight, so thank you for that, and approachable for everybody. So
Thanks.
The number's up here if you want to send in texts. I've already got some I can start with, but we can still have them coming in. I'm gonna start with one here. You've made chemistry less toxic, beer tastes better, stinky clothes less stinky. Of all your accomplishments, what are you most proud of?
Wow. I think that's Bob's question. I think it's more about the structures that we set up to help people do those things. I think the educational programs that we put together, the facilities that we put together to help people do those things. So I think at the end of the day, those are the things that I'm most proud of. It's the systems that we put in place to try to do these things. It's the people we trained. The other things are great challenges for sure, but I think what I'm most proud of is the people parts of that.
Makes sense. All right, thank you.
It's not the question, the answer you were thinking you'd get.
It was actually what I thought. I mean, there's definitely a theme throughout everything that you've done, right?
Yeah.
So this one is from the audience.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
What chemicals make Defunctify so good at removing the fatty acids? How are they produced? And a related question, would using Dawn help to solve the same problem?
The key thing is that whatever you use, it all has to rinse off. It can't leave residues behind. I couldn't comment on the Dawn part of it because we haven't really looked at that as a dish soap for clothing. What is super important is you've got to both chew up those fatty acids. So there are enzymes in these detergents that do that, not just ours, but others as well. And that's a really important aspect, is having the right enzymes. And I would also say from a chemistry perspective, that's a huge opportunity for design of new enzymes, and there's some of that going on in the Knight campus. It's really exciting.
Awesome. All right, another one from the audience. This is a really good question. Is there anything chemistry can do to save us from all the microplastics that are out there?
Oh, yeah, good question. Well, I think, yeah, so the microplastics are largely a consequence of a lot of our washing. You know, when it comes to clothing, it's a lot of washing. So one aspect is how do we wash less? So I think that's where these kind of products could be really helpful. But I also think that thinking about fiber design, which is not really chemistry, but it's more macroscopic, I think that's actually where we might be able to do a better job with that. Then the last thing is, can we imagine plastics that, though they might be released, will degrade well out in the environment so that they don't persist in the environment? And I think that's a global challenge with green chemistry, is how do we anticipate those things that will persist and accumulate, and then make sure that we design them so that they're more inclined to be to naturally decompose in the environment.
So it's all about starting with the right design criteria and goals.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that is absolutely right. Is for years we never had the right design criteria. We got to think about those things from the beginning.
Yep. All right, here's not a surprising one. Do you need volunteers on campus in your Brewing Innovation?
Maybe. What, volunteer tasters or?
I do that on almost a daily basis.
I know.
Like, Jim, are you tasting today? I'm going to follow up with one of my questions on this, because I do love the Brewing Innovation program, and I think it's brilliant in many ways, but in particular, how you've opened it up to any discipline at UVO. There's no prerequisites for this, and that was intentional, not only to be inclusive, but also to promote the creativity process.
Yeah.
And I do want to say, first of all, I'm really glad that you're not just doing a class on beer making. That would have been harder to explain to the provost and president.
Yeah.
But it's really focused on innovation and creativity. But could you talk about that aspect of the program?
Yeah, I think one of my pet peeves is that in chemistry, for example, I think we do an unfortunately good job of weeding people out. And the challenges that we face require that it requires a diverse set of skills and talents. And so if we are at the beginning stages weeding out all but like one type of person, there's no chance that we're going to solve those problems in the long run. So in part, the inspiration with Brewing Innovation was, I mean, certainly innovation is a team sport, but also I think just in too many disciplines, we optimize for like one kind of learning style and one kind of background, and that's to our detriment. So if we can keep things open, like even though we might have to teach our business people more chemistry during that, that's good, that's fine. But I love that they bring their skills to it, that the historian in our class brings that history angle. It's really exciting to bring all of those people together.
And there's actually real science behind interdisciplinary teams do a better job designing than if you have them just in the same discipline. I'm going to stay within the theme of beer for one more question here. This is an interesting question. What is the most chemically complex beer and best tasting beer? And is there a relationship between the two?
Well, I would say that probably the most chemically complex beers are the beers that are, like Alesong makes here. They are mixed culture, so you have to control wild yeast and bacteria at different levels. There's wood infusion due to cask conditioning. There's fruit in there. I mean, that's a lot going on, and it all has to be in balance or it won't make a great beer. So I think those are the most complex ones. And, what's the best beer? It depends on what you like, right? That's the cool thing, right? I can tell you that what we know from our students is young people don't particularly like IPAs, so we have kind of a focus group here. It's like perhaps for the future of the industry, other beer styles are probably necessary.
Kind of an old guy thing, IPAs. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to shift and go back up a little bit because we're getting a ton of questions about federal funding.
Oh. Yeah.
And yeah, if you
I have all the answers.
you have all the answers. Yeah. So it's just a very simple question. What does the future of research look like?
Well, yeah. That's a good question. I guess I'd just say two things. You know, right now things are uncertain, and you know we're really encouraging everybody to forge ahead. And I think a couple of things. One is we don't know where we're going to end, so forging ahead maybe is the best plan we can have. I think diversifying our funding bases is really valuable, and we should do that anyway. And then the other thing is we got to tell the story of our accomplishments and our impacts better, right? That's just a fact. We need to do a better job of explaining why it matters and why we should be spending federal dollars on it. I think there's lots of good stories to tell, but I don't know that we always do a good job of telling those stories.
Part of the reason we're doing this tonight.
Yes.
Another question here is sort of about your career. Many professors focus on one research area their entire career. How do you find balance in being focused on developing a scientific idea while maintaining your entrepreneurial ethos? How important is collaboration versus being self-reliant in these endeavors?
Oh, there's a lot in there. When I was an assistant professor, there were a lot of full professors that told me I should focus. And I didn't really take that advice. I mean, personally, I'm excited by the new. I'm not that excited by, I want to solve problems, I want to build things, I want to just do new stuff. So I have to do that, and I think the question pointed out one of the key things in that is collaboration. Because there are other people that have different skill sets than I have that may want to pursue something in greater depth or for longer than I do. And that's awesome. So I think one of the keys to being able to do the entrepreneurial work, do the research work, be able to be fresh and move to different things, all has to do with finding the right collaborators.
There's so many good questions. We're running out of time. It's hard to choose. But as a fan of Star Wars, I have to ask this one. Are you tired of people telling you that you look like Mark Hamill?
Well, I used to be tired of that, but not so much anymore. No, the worst one was when I was in high school, and it's like, hey, Starsky, where's Hutch? It's like,
personally, I think you've aged a lot better.
oh, thanks.
All right, well, maybe we'll end on this one. A little bit of sad news for those that don't know in the audience. Jim is retiring this year. So maybe... That was a minority of the audience that groaned. I thought it would be everybody.
Oh.
Maybe you could tell us about what you plan to do with your time. What are you going to miss the most?
Oh, wow, that's two different questions. Well, I love the outdoors. I want to spend a lot more time in the outdoors. I want to spend time adventuring. So those are things I want to do. Sailing and hiking. And, I think I'll miss the people.
Jim, I want to thank you. That was an incredible lecture. Every year I get stressed about this point. There's even more how we're going to top it next year. But
theater in the round.
Yeah. You're an incredible role model for all of us. So thanks so much. And thank you all for coming tonight.